I would like to advise all those present that notice of this special meeting of the Municipal Council of the City of Bayonne of January 25th, 2023, has been provided to the public in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meeting Act of the State of New Jersey. Notice of the time and place of the meeting was posted and filed with the City Clerk and was forwarded to the Jersey Journal and the Star Ledger by fax and regular mail on January 23rd, 2023. The special meeting of the Municipal Council of the City of Bayonne is now in session. Ms. Medina, please call the roll.
Mr. Booker?
Here.
Mr. Carroll?
Here.
Mr. Perez?
Present.
Ms. Weimer?
Here.
Mr. La Palusa?
Here, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our first item is from the Honorable James M. Davis, Mayor, calling a special meeting of the Municipal Council for Wednesday, January 25th, 2023, at 7 p.m. in the Dorothy E. Harrington Council Chambers as a time and place for this meeting. Who'd like to move it?
Move it. Second.
And on the officer's report, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer.
Aye.
Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
R1 is authorizing a closed session to discuss matters within the attorney-client privilege pursuant to NJSA 10:4-12. Who'd like to move it?
Move it.
Second.
Could I ask what that's pertaining to, please?
Somebody want to answer that? Anybody want to answer?
Go ahead, answer. Sure.
The question that was posed from the audience, from Ms. Godesky, was what it pertains to. It pertains to the three items that are on the agenda. These are negotiations, essentially, and the council is going to go into closed session to discuss the particulars of this and come out after the closed session is finished.
And on that resolution, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer.
Aye.
Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
Take a motion to reconvene.
So move.
Second.
And on the motion to reconvene, Mr. Booker.
Here.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer.
Aye.
Mr. La Palusa.
Aye. We thought that Joe Bauman should give an overview of the project first, and then we can have everybody come up. And at that point, we'll entertain questions actually with the speakers, because we know this is a lot of moving parts, it's a very big project, and it's going to beget other questions. So, Joe, if you want to give your overview first.
Thank you, Council President. Do I need to hold this down to talk? Is that what?
Push the button down, Joe.
And keep it? Okay. Joe Bauman. So who am I? My name is Joe Bauman. I'm from Manneman, Scotland and Bauman. We were retained by the city of Bayonne to represent the city and the taxpayers in connection with the negotiation of the financial terms of an agreement with the Togus 1888 redevelopment project. By way of background, I have about 35 years experience doing this. The firm itself has been around for 50 years. My background is finance, development, redevelopment, land use. So we have, between myself and our team, a lot of experience in this. This project tonight is just a step in a fairly long process that arguably began 20 years ago when the city of Bayonne first tried to develop this portion of the city. So 20 years ago, we began the process of declaring this an area in need of redevelopment. That was actually the beginning of the process that's taken a very number of twists and turns. It overcame a lot of challenges to get to the point we are today. Today is also not the end of the story. Tonight we'll introduce, if the council agrees and finds it favorable, a package of 3 pieces of legislation. There's still a public hearing that will happen in about 3 weeks, plenty of time for people to digest, review, think about their questions, and come back to the public hearing. The agreements and the legislation will be posted, so you'll have plenty of time to look at it. Yeah, I guess I got to hold it. So you'll have three weeks to think about it. We'll be back here again in the public hearing, but we can answer more questions. So there's going to be a lot to unpack, a lot for you to think about, and a lot of time for you to think about it. And even the governing body today is still drilling us with questions, challenging our advice, asking us the hard questions on behalf of you to make sure that we have a project that you can be proud of. So again, it begins 20 years ago, this story. Along the way, it almost became a residential project. They struggled to get it cleaned up. As we sit here today, the site is fully remediated. They've begun to fill the site to bring it to the right level to deal with the new stormwater and floodplain regulations, the DEP requirements. That's almost done. So that project, if you went out there today, it looks obviously dramatically different than it did even a year ago. So what is the goal here, and what is the project itself? So to begin the project itself, the project is going to be about in excess of 1.4 million square feet of movie studios. Not unlike any of the movie studios if you've ever been to California, Paramount. So it'll look a lot like that. It's going to, when it's done, it's going to employ somewhere north of 2,100 people. The project itself will have more employees than the largest current employer in the city of Bayonne, which is Bayonne Hospital. It'll become the largest taxpayer in the city of Bayonne once completed, larger than IMTT. So this is a game changer, a transformational project. If there ever was one, it's clearly one of the most significant projects being undertaken in the entire state of New Jersey. And with that, size of a project, that importance of a project, it was really critical for us to work hard to get a transaction that we could be comfortable with. The project itself has a number of components. The first one that we're going to talk about is the financial agreement. So I think the city of Bayonne is familiar with financial agreements generally. They're typically housing projects or warehouse projects, and they're often a percentage of annual gross revenues. This financial agreement is different. It actually is a calculation that's based on the greater of 5 different numbers. And as I walk you through those numbers, you'll begin to understand why it's as complicated as and why it needs sort of these 5 different.
It's very hard to understand as well.
You hear me when I yell? Because I'd rather talk loud. I'm having trouble hearing myself. This one here?
Yeah.
Thanks. No, I'm glad you told me. Oh, this is so much better. Oh, thank you. Boy, should I start over, more or less? So I think we got the point, right, that we have a lot of time to sort of sort this out. We understand that we're in a process that began 20 years ago and finding us today, and we still have a lot to do. And I'm starting to describe to you what's going to happen tonight and give you a little more detail about the project. I think I already explained to you the number of jobs. I explained to you the amount of ratables that's going to come from this project. I should also add that the construction of the project will be 100% union labor. I should also add that built into the agreement is a requirement that they use local employees, both for the construction and for the operation, and there'll be a robust effort to find those folks as we go through both construction and operation of the project. I should also add that the project, once completed, will have a very variety of jobs. So unlike perhaps a warehouse, for example, the jobs in a movie theater is everything from plumber to electrician to stage builder to hairdresser to custom design, almost anything you can think of. Those are the kinds of jobs, and they're often very well paid. So this is very much different than any other project that Bayonne has seen today. And at the end of the day, it also doesn't draw a lot on municipal services. There'll be traffic for sure, but there obviously won't be additional children in the schools. It's not expected that it'll have a huge draw on the police or fire. There'll be requirements. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a huge net positive financially to the city. It's estimated that the direct, indirect, and induced benefit to the city and the region is somewhere around $190 million annually, most of which is salaries and payroll for the various users. So it's a game changer, and this is sort of putting aside the cachet that comes with having a movie studio, right? It's not, Bayonne certainly has its own independent cachet that exists. I think this just will enhance that. So that's the kind of project we're talking about here. It's the same project that we recently presented to the local finance board. They unanimously gave positive findings with no recommendations. So our state local finance board has reviewed it, and they concluded that in a positive unanimous vote that we should move forward. So that's the project, and that's why this type of project requires something different. It requires a participation from the public sector, in this case in the tune of a $65 million guarantee of bonds. That is not a number that myself, that advises the city, our financial advisor, or any of the professional team take lightly. Certainly, this governing body has drilled us hard about why that number is required, and ultimately, how are we protected in the event that that debt doesn't get paid. So I'm going to work my way into that explanation, but I want to start by having you understand how the pilot is paid. So a pilot, or we call it an annual service charge, it's the same thing. It's a payment that the property owner makes on the improvements, not the land. The land gets taxed as it normally does. On the improvements, instead of paying full taxes, they pay an annual service charge. Our financial advisor went through the work. We went through all the numbers. We reviewed the expected revenues, the construction costs, all those things, and concluded that this pilot was necessary in order for them to do their project. So that's the first threshold. So that the annual service charge now that's going to replace the otherwise applicable taxes is going to be the greater of 5 numbers. And I'm going to, if you look in section 4 of the financial agreement, you'll need a graph to figure it all out. I'm going to try and walk it through you a little more carefully because it's complex, but at the end of the day, it's really important to understand why we have the greater of 5 numbers. The first number is they can never pay less than the debt service on these bonds that we're going to issue and the taxes immediately prior to the annual service charge, which is something around 1.2 million, of which we, I think, keep 530,000. So they can never pay less than that. That's the first floor. The second number is we've established a minimum per square foot number that we always want to get based upon the project, so they can never pay less than that number plus the debt service on the bonds. I'm always going to say plus the debt service on the bonds because they can never pay less than the debt service on the bonds. And when I say pay, that's the annual service charge replacing their taxes. The third number, and this is designed to protect us if the project is famously successful. So our second number is a per square foot number. We've also layered in a percentage of annual gross revenues. The purpose of that number is, say over time their revenues are so high that the annual service charge seems out of sync with what they should be paying. Well, in that case, for the first 5 years, it's 10% of annual gross revenues, and then for the remainder, it's 18%. So you probably see a lot of your residential projects in Bayonne somewhere around 10, 12, something like that. So this project will have yet another number in the event that their revenues become in so high where they're now paying a percentage of the gross revenues. And that's a really easy calculation. You just add up all the numbers, you apply the percentage. Bayonne does that regularly for other projects. The next number that we look for is over time, we need this project to start getting closer to what full taxes would be. And so over time, we compare each of those numbers, the annual service charge, to a percentage of what the taxes would otherwise be. By the end of the term, we're comparing it to 80% of otherwise taxes. And in all likelihood, that will become the greater number by the end. That's over the 30-year period. So at some level, that's why, for example, one of the council appropriates said, why can't we do 20 years? Why does it have to be 30 years? One, the project requires it in our estimation, but two, at the back end, that's really when the city of Bayonne really is going to do well, because now we're getting, and we get 95% of that annual service charge. We keep 95%, the city does, 5% goes to the county, just again on the improvements. Over time, we get a big percent of a big pie. Now we're getting a big percent of a smaller pie, but still much more than we would be otherwise getting if we just were collecting the taxes as is today. So that's why the sort of the staged increase. So it's designed, the formula, to have a minimum number that makes sure we never get less than we got before, and then a bigger minimum number that is designed to based on the per square foot, and then eventually based on annual gross revenues, and then otherwise applicable taxes. So in Section 4, you'll see a somewhat complex narrative or description, legal description on how that gets calculated. But that's really the ultimate, the goal of the annual service charge. So that's how we decide what they should pay instead of taxes. We're going to issue a bond. How do we protect the city of Bayonne against having the bondholders not get paid and then have the city have to pay on its guarantee? That is really the $65 million question, right? That was the challenge that the mayor and the governing body put to us, is to make sure that the city's protected. So the first order, so imagine a situation where, and for now I'll start with a fully built facility and then I'll back up to what happens during construction. Imagine the facility's fully built. It's estimated to be about $900 million of a cost. So let's call it's worth $1 billion at that point. Our $65 million loan, which will be ahead of every other loan and all of their equity, because it's like taxes, would be under 5%. So it would be like if you own a home for $500,000 and you have a 5% mortgage, 5% of that is a mortgage, so call it $25,000 mortgage on your $500,000 home, and the rest is equity. What are the odds of you, the homeowner, and/or the bank, not making sure that gets paid? That's how secure our $65 million, because it will be ahead of everybody else. If there's a bank, which there will be, that's made a loan, and all the investors that put money into this project, they will lose their property if we ever have to foreclose on our annual service charge. So we're very well protected. We're very, the lien to value ratio, the debt to value, our being the debt because we're in front, we're first lien, is multiples of what anyone would typically hope for or expect on any other traditional loan. But before that even gets to that point, we've required them to put up a direct pay letter of credit with a bank that the BA, with the advice of counsel and financial advisors, will approve. That will be the first source of repayment. So if there's a missed annual service charge payment that's supposed to go pay the debt service, we will turn to the letter of credit bank, and they will have to make the payment, which they would do, right? And they would then step into the shoes of, they would then have an agreement with the property owner, which would allow them to do all the things that lenders can do to make sure that people that they lend money to pay their debts. So that's the first source of repayment. We think that is pretty good by itself. And then the next source becomes the annual service charge that I just walked through with you, if that's not being made. And then you'll see in this package that we've also layered in a special assessment. So why did we do that? The special assessment is like a built-in suspenders around the annual service charge. So to the extent that it was determined that the annual service charge could be, say the property owner went into bankruptcy and they could do something, the annual service charge could be delayed or changed. Special assessments are like taxes, and there is no ability to do that. So special assessment sort of wraps for us an additional layer of security. We spoke to local finance board, we talked about it as a belt and suspenders to make sure that we get title to that property if we ever need to take it, and we're totally secure. So those are all, and before that all happened, and if all of that fails, that's when the city would step in. And if the city did have to step in, we would take the property, right? We would step in, we'd have to pay the debt service for some period of time, and then we would foreclose on the land, and we would own it. And as a city owning that asset, we could do with whatever we want with it. I can tell you, as we sit here today, that property without anything on it is already worth more than the $65 million because they purchased it, and they've remediated, and they've raised it. All substantial investments in that property already. So from day one, our investment is already secure. The expectation is that we're going to provide our investment into the project at the same time that their debt and equity comes in. So all the money comes in together. So we're confident that they have the funds to build the project. They're going to have a guaranteed maximum price contract or something like that to have it built. So they have all the money. They have the agreement with the contractors to move forward, and then they're moving from construction to completion, which is probably the most vulnerable part of the project during that period of time. And that's why we, in part, also have the special assessment, because the special assessment will attach to the property as soon as the improvements, the local improvements begin to be made, which we'll make sure is written that way, and when we're part of the loan documents we're involved in, whereas the annual service charge doesn't start till the project is actually completed. So the special assessment also helps us during this sort of early construction phase. So that's the package of security that we wrap around the $65 million so that at the end of the day, the city doesn't ultimately have to pay on that guarantee. But as one of the council people were asking me, well, that's great, Joe, but what if that does happen? And anyway, all these things, and we still find ourselves where we have to make these payments, which are not $65 million. We'd be making the annual payments, which could be like $5 million, a big number for sure. But now we would take back the property, right? And we could, because we're the city, we could also change this. I'm not saying we would or wouldn't do this, but we control the zoning of that property. So we could immediately make it more valuable, perhaps by changing it from what it's zoned today to, again, not suggesting we would do it at the time, but because we are the government, we also get to decide what is built on that property. So we ultimately can control the value. We can make it more valuable, for example, after we took it over by simply turning it into a residential project, for example, which, again, I'm not suggesting we would or wouldn't. My point being that because we are ultimately have the ability to take the property, if they fail to pay the taxes, the same way we would taxes, and in the likelihood that ever happened, now we have this 58-acre uplands piece of property underneath the bridge, looking at the water, that we could then monetize in another way. So that's sort of the project. And then I think the last piece of legislation is the guarantee that I just described. So there'll be a $65 million bond issue. It'll happen simultaneous with the other financing. And then that bond issue will be issued sometime probably this year. They are far along. I think they're looking to finance and get out of the ground, and that's part of the reason we had this special meeting. We wanted to have a special meeting so that we could be in time for the February 14th meeting to have the public hearing, and it was important to the council president that we give you plenty of time. So we're here today 3 weeks ahead of time. So I know we often get the comments are often things like, why are we just hearing about this? We don't have enough time, and we're accounting for that. We're accounting for that, we think, by giving you 3 weeks, by my presentation, by the community meeting that already happened, and we're hopeful that will give you plenty of time to, if you don't have your questions ready for tonight, to come back. We'll be back here together. We'll also have the financial advisor, the rest of the team, to answer your questions. So we're hopeful that process is going to give you plenty of time. Again, it's something that the local finance board has reviewed already. The professional team has spent the better part of the last 9 months or a year working on it. They have their site plan approvals. It's remediating a contaminated property that's been that way for 20 plus years or longer since it was closed. Huge amount of jobs, huge rateable for the city, even with the annual service charge. It's really a unique project, and frankly, I'm really proud and happy to be part of it. So from that, I thank you, and I thank the governing body. But I'm here to answer questions if there's more.
You want to go by the speakers first?
Yeah, I'll do that. Well, that's what we're going to do. Ms. Gadesky?
Should I stay here?
Stay there.
Okay.
This is public comments, yes?
Yes.
And then I can ask my questions at public comments?
We're going to answer your questions. We're going to do something out of the norm.
Thank you very much, Council President. Okay, I did time it. It's 3 minutes, but then I have questions, so please bear with me. The article in the Hudson View that was published today is based on the original application to the Bayonne Planning Board. At the January 10th meeting of the Planning Board, the applicant requested amendments which are not de minimis, in my opinion, and they include the elimination of previous approved underground parking spaces, structures, eliminating the screening and post-production office building, eliminating the creative office building, as well as the elimination of the central utility plant and associated utility yard, which, by the way, will therefore increase the power grid for the city of Bayonne. Therefore, the residents will wind up paying for the power that is utilized by the developer. Other changes include reconfiguration in size and location of the stage buildings, which are actually now just warehouses. Will this wind up being the largest employer in the city of Bayonne and the largest taxpayer? From what I know, the Bayonne Board of Ed is the largest employer and probably will always be the largest. And currently, IMTT is the largest taxpayer in the city. So Bayonne residents, is this a project you're really worth $65 million when those funds that might be bonded could go for the benefit of our water and sewer, roads and bridges? Ask yourself this question, and please show up at February 15th meeting to voice your opinion. Now for my questions, Mr. Baumann. Bear with me, I have to change screens here. Oh, part two.
You're much more tech savvy than I am. I couldn't work the microphone.
Okay, so why are we bonding? What is in it for the city of Bayonne?
So for the city of Bayonne, it's a number of things. One, it's the construction jobs, and there's a local preference. Two, it's the full-time jobs, which when I gave you the employment numbers, I was only looking at private employers. So I didn't check to see how many the Board of Ed. You may be right. But it's still 2,100 jobs. It's substantial.
Originally, it was 3,000, I believe, was it not?
I don't know what it originally is. That's the number that we've presented everywhere that I've presented.
Okay,
So
thank you.
2,100, yeah. I could go on, but
Okay, what, with the major changes, what is the value and cost of the project now?
so with the numbers I gave you, the one plus more than 1.4 million square feet is the numbers with the changes, and the value is still somewhere in the $900 million range.
It's still in there,
Yeah.
okay. Developers should be able to get the construction loan for the full amount through lending syndication and having a lead bank. Why are we now becoming part of the lending process?
So the lenders are going to put in about 30% equity. They'll never get the full loan. So of the $900 million, back out our 65, about 30% of that will be equity, and I think they're almost all equity now. So I think they're in for over 100 already, and then the balance will be a loan. And the analysis by our financial advisor, who will be at our public hearing, is that the $65 million is the amount needed to close the gap and still make this a project that's financially viable.
They cannot get a lending syndication going, like most contractors do at large amounts?
I'm sure their lending group is a syndication. I don't know. We'll find out when we get to the closing. But I agree with you. I think they would probably have a syndicate. It's a big number.
Okay, you did discuss the liens, but what bank would approve leaving the first lien to the city of Bayonne for like 6.5% of the entire project?
So-
Would we get the whole property back for
You
that
would.
$65 million?
You would, yeah. That's why it looked like it will never happen, that they'll let that, the bank or the equity will never let that happen. I've experienced other projects where they went dark for years. They never stopped paying their annual service charge. But the bank has no choice. That lien is by law, so they have no choice but to have us have a first lien. It's built into the statute. They also understand that taxes are always ahead of them, so it's not out of the ordinary for a bank to have that lien ahead of them. Every deal they ever did, taxes already pay, or always have a higher lien.
Well, it's not usual for a bank to do that. I was a banker, so it's not,
Well, think of
it's
when you were,
very unusual to give up your lien.
well, when you were a banker in any kind of loan, right? Paying the taxes, the real estate taxes, was always ahead of you,
Yes.
right? This is the same thing. You have to think of the annual service charge like taxes. So the bank that lends you money for your home knows that if you don't pay the taxes, the town can take your home, and the bank doesn't let that happen. They pay the taxes for you if you don't pay it. Same thing here. It's more like that.
So you're saying on the record that if they default, we will get the entire property back? On the record, you're saying that?
I'm saying that if we would have the right to foreclose and take the property if they failed to pay their annual service charge and special
You
assessment.
say if, but would we?
No, if they failed to pay.
If they
We
failed-
would be if they failed to pay, not,
Okay, I still have questions, bear with me. And how will this impact taxes in the debt service? How will that help with the, because if you take the Walmart RAB, for example, it took us 20 years, and we're just getting some money in now
I see.
towards our taxes.
So here, the annual service charge has two components. One is the equivalent of the debt service. Two is all the money that the city gets. So we're getting money day one, which is estimated to be about $2.6 million once they're fully built. That's on top of the debt service. So you're talking about the Bayonne Crossing? Is that the
For
project?
Walmart,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So in the Bayonne Crossing, I'm familiar with that. Almost all that, you're right, goes to pay debt service until the project is paid off. But this is not that. This one, there is a substantial, making them the largest, what will be the largest taxpayer in Bayonne, the amount that we collect from them. Because on top of the debt service, in Bayonne Crossing, 100% of the dollars go to the debt service. In here, it's a fraction. It's not 100%, and we keep the balance.
How much of the payment will be usable to the city?
Everything the city gets comes in like taxes and can be used for any municipal purpose.
Is the financial agreement transferable?
It runs with the land, yes.
I'm sorry?
It runs with the land. Whoever owns the land gets the pilot.
It shouldn't be. It should not be transferable.
And it has to be because we need the pledge to pay the debt service on the bond. So for a number of reasons, the financial agreement can't be terminated. It has to run with the land. It has to last forever because whoever owns that land has to be responsible, pay the annual service charge so the bond gets paid off. So it's in our interest, frankly, that it is recorded, and we'll record this on the property. So if you do a title search, you'll find this financial agreement. And so whoever buys the property is going to step into the shoes and have to pay the annual service charge, including the debt service.
How
So
will that impact the city's overall compensation?
it doesn't change. Whoever owns it steps into the shoes and has to comply with the agreement. Never changes.
Now, since there'll be no utility plan to put in place, PSE&G will have to expand the power grid. Who will wind up paying the increase in the power grid with
So-
that gone?
PSE is a, as you know, public utility. So all of their capital improvements are spread out to every ratepayer that pays electric or
I'm sorry,
gas.
can you repeat that?
So like every other utility, when they make improvements, it's paid for by the entire rate base, not just Bayonne. Every single person, I have public service. I don't live in Bayonne. I'll pick up part of the cost because the same way anything that happens in another town, Bayonne pays for, right? So a utility spreads out their capital across the entire rate base.
So the residents are going to wind up paying and footing the bill in some way or form for all the power that they're using?
No, they'll- I'm sorry.
Transformers, et cetera, et
They'll
cetera.
pay for their own power, of course, but for the capital improvements that public service makes, just like any capital improvements they make anywhere in the state of New Jersey, it's shared by everybody.
Okay, my final note to Council President and the councils. If and when you approve this tonight as introduction, my question is, earlier today, I spoke to Madam Clerk Medina, asking her for a full copy of the ordinance. Before you approve it, do each of you have or will have a copy of the full ordinance in front of you? Please make sure that you have that in front of you before voting. And my question to Madam Clerk, will I have a copy of the full ordinances tonight? Tomorrow? Okay, but they should be here.
Process is, they get their packet. They can choose not to introduce any of these, which is why I couldn't give them to you. They can be on the agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
They could decide, after I read it, not to move it. That's gone. It no longer exists.
Okay, right. But if they
So-
approve it, can I have a copy
You can-
tonight?
It depends upon what time we finish. I'd like to go home.
Well, so would I, but
I mean,
I'm
like-
here on a rainy day.
Yeah, I've been here since 8:30, but I'm not going to argue with that.
So we're
I
going
can
to
give it
post
to
it.
you first thing tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
I would like it tonight.
I will give it to you tomorrow morning.
And then you have 3 weeks. So let me just add a little bit to that color. So we presented the form of these agreements to the governing body. The reason that these are generally not shared is perhaps they would say to us, we're not voting for it, go back and change this, or we don't like this. Now, we're in constantly contact through the council's office. But if that were to happen, it would be better that these continue to remain negotiating documents until we're approved.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman, for all your questions. Council, I'm requesting that you table this. There's still a lot of questions that need to be answered, and since the Sunshine Law only gives 2 days' notice to the public regarding a special meeting, and a lot of people were unaware of this meeting, I really think that you need to table it and give everybody that was at the Bayonne High School for the original meeting to come and listen to Mr. Baumann and ask all the pertinent questions. So I'm asking you respectfully to please table this and have another meeting where all the residents have timely notice to come and discuss this most important deal that the city of Bayonne has on the table today. Respectfully, I ask you that.
This is an introduction, and next month, people will have the opportunity to come back again. So that will be another meeting in which they'll have time to ask questions and review this. And
But-
there'll be 3 weeks in between, and this is, I believe, the either third or fourth meeting about this, including
It's not the third or
public
fourth meeting. You only had one meeting at Bayonne High School, Gary.
This is the second one, and February will be the third.
I realize that, but I think that you need to have an open forum, just like at Bayonne High School, for all the residents to come. Give them more notice, because there's still more questions. I'm going to go back and read the ordinance and probably come back with more questions, and we'll be here till 11 o'clock that night.
Gail, February 15th is designed specifically for that. Ordinances require a public hearing. We normally don't have discussion at introduction.
I understand.
We understand this is a major project that's going to have an incredible impact on the city of Bayonne, so that we're allowing for questions this evening. We've got Mr. Baumann here to provide the overview, and the documents will be available tomorrow. They'll be posted on the website. People will have 3 weeks to cogitate over it, and then ask questions at the open public hearing that's required by the statute. And there's no guarantee that, if it goes to 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, because people are asking questions, it can roll over to the next meeting. It doesn't have to close. The public hearing doesn't have to close that evening. If questions are asked that engender questions on the part of the council to ask our legal counsel, that can happen. But tonight is just an introduction. It's a way to get the paperwork out to people so that it's introduced. It's a final document for our purposes. And then people they have 3 weeks to sit and read these documents, talk about it, and come up with their questions for February 15th. And on the 15th, there's no guarantee that the public hearing will close that night.
If this was a $65 million bond for our water, our sewers, our roads and bridges, I'd be 100% for it. I was 100% for this project before this $65 million bond came. We're not in the lending business. We're not in the
Gail,
lending business.
That's a different issue than whether or not a public hearing should be had tonight or more notice. You've been pretty clear about your opposition to this, and everyone has the right to be opposed to, men's amends about it, or in favor of it. So that's a different issue. But what you just brought up was, we need more notice, we need more notice. Your notice is, it's a regularly scheduled meeting on February 15th. You have the documents as of this evening. Tomorrow, Madeline will send them to you personally, because you requested it, and then they'll also be up on the website, including the local finance board application, my understanding is. So you have all the paperwork to be able to review and comment in 3 weeks.
My one more question to Mr. Bowman. Has the lending been done already?
No.
Do they have the funding?
No, we're not gonna issue this bond until that closing happens. It'll happen simultaneously. No.
Okay, do you have any idea when that will be?
We're hopeful in the next 90 days and breaking ground sometime.
So why the rush? If it's going to take 90 days for them to get the rest of their finances in order, why are we rushing through this?
Let me answer that. Two questions. I'll come back to one of the ones you've said before. To this one, so they need, in order to go to their lenders or their equity folks, they need to know what the decision is by the city of Bayonne. So our decision is a condition precedent to them getting the lenders and the equity people signed up to do the project, because without this, the view is that they can't move forward and they probably wouldn't get the loan. So knowing how we stand on this issue is sort of a critical component for them to do the next step. So that's why the urgency to get moving. We've been at, it seems not that long for you, but it's been a long time. Let me just address, too, your suggestion that a $65 million water and sewer investment would be better. You have to keep in mind, again, that that $65 million bond you described will be paid for by the ratepayers of the city of Bayonne, right? This debt is being paid for by that property owner. It's not coming out of the taxpayers' pockets. It's an add-on to their annual service charge. So this is not the same as the city borrowing $65 million for water improvements that are paid by ratepayers. This is a $65 million loan that they're paying back, that specific property owner. It's like a special assessment, so, which it is, right? So it's an assessment on their property, and they're paying that loan back, not the taxpayers or the ratepayers.
Excuse my ignorance, but will the financial agreement be included in the ordinance that I'll get from you tomorrow? Everything will be included?
Yeah.
I's dotted, T's crossed. And will
I'd like to think so.
Will the actual application that you filed with the local finance board be included in that?
We can put that up.
I would like to see that as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Desmond?
Hi.
Good evening. Not much left to say. It does sound like an exciting project, but it's very hard for any of you to convince anybody who is listening or heard of it at all, whether it be at the high school now or next in 3 weeks, why the deal is incumbent upon our bonding. I mean our bonding for $65 million. It's hard to do the processing. In addition to that, it does seem rushed. I know you've been working on it a long time, but the processing, especially when there's concern, no matter what you say about who's going to pay what back on what timeline, it's still $65 million, and it always will rest on the shoulders of taxpayers here in Bayonne until it's resolved. I don't know if that's just a generation. I know payments start once the project is complete. What is the timeline for that, by the way?
So it's about 30 months, I think.
It's actually
Is that
not
right?
bad.
How long?
Oops,
30.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But I want to say this. I have a lot of questions. I'm not going to do it all tonight because, if you don't mind, I'd like exactly the same packet. But I would love to see this body, that front office, spend the same amount of time and energy and concern and consideration and possibly bonding on putting new schools in this town. Our children have been here. They were here first before this project. There's a lot that still needs to be done, and we still haven't resolved the issue of the hospital. But bonding for something like that, when nothing's been done to help the students in this town, that's not on you. You were hired to do this, but it's on us.
Nice to see you again.
Melissa Godesky.
Good evening. Thank you for your time today. I want to start off with a little bit of comment, if you don't mind, and then some questions. I will not disagree with anything that has already been said, especially considering that, yeah, I think a school is way more important. This is how'd you get here? You went to school, right?
I did.
Because you sound like a very intelligent man. And you sound like you're doing an amazing job, but a school got you here, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Our city has done an amazing job growing. Okay, amazing job. but there's still areas we need to work on. And I want to start off by saying this. It'd be really hard to convince the city of Bayonne to bond for $65 million after they're already bonding for $65 million if we ever needed to go down that route, right, as an educational system. I mean, we have a teacher on the council who probably classroom gets really hot because, air conditioning. All those employees, they're going to have air conditioning and really fair work environments. There's kids that need to get special documentation to have an air conditioning in a classroom. So just want to start there because that's where my heart lays, and sounds like an exciting project. I actually don't disagree with the project. I just don't, to everybody else's point, processing, why do you need our $65 million when I'm sure some of us would rather give that $65 million to a school? So just to start there, and again, I'm not disagreeing with the project. I'm not against growth. I'm not against Bayonne becoming stronger and better and more attractive. But there are many other priorities that need to be considered when making these decisions on behalf of the taxpayers. So I guess my first question is, and to clarify, because I do need clarity, this is not what I do, do the residents of Bayonne get to vote on whether or not a $65 million bond will take place for this project? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Another clarifying question. If ever the Bayonne Board of Education wanted to build a new school and had to get a $65 million bond, would they have to ask the city of Bayonne, go to referendum to get permission to go for that bond? Yes or no?
Yes.
What's the, and I know the difference between the bonds. I want to be clear. I very well listened.
Yeah.
But to the people who are not in finance, who are not in your chairs, it almost doesn't make sense. I feel like our opinions do matter in this, and I know why they don't, which is kind of scary for me to admit, but they should. So that was just two of my questions, but I guess more questions for you.
You want me to tackle the couple of your comments?
Sure, go for it.
So just first place, unfortunately, it's not a choice between this project or a new school, right? This bond, well, it's not, because the first place, the requirement for a referendum or not in redevelopment, the law specifically says you can't. In school law, it says you can. That's a conversation to have with your state legislatures, first place, right? So the law says redevelopment can't be put to referendum. The law says Board of Ed borrowings has to go to referendum. So that's not in the hands of anybody on this dais, even if they wanted to. They had no choice.
Sorry, 1 second. Is Assemblyman Sampson here tonight? No. I just would wonder, because he does represent us on another level, so I was hoping he'd be here. I just wanted to know, because he does represent us on another level, so I thought it'd be great for him to be here to hear our comments. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. But there's a distinction I'm failing to communicate. It's that when the Board of Ed issues bonds for a new school, that is paid back by the entire tax base of the city of Bayonne. This bond is not going to get paid back by the taxpayers of the city of Bayonne. It's only going to get paid back by that property owner through a special assessment. So that's a really specific and significant difference between the two. So that's why when I say we couldn't spend that $65 million on a new school, and because this is unique to their project, it's a special assessment on their project, it's going to benefit their project, they're going to pay for it 100%. As opposed to the school example where it's paid for by all the taxpayers. That's sort of a completely different discussion, which actually probably isn't here. Yeah.
Getting 66 some odd residents to understand that will be very complicated.
Yeah,
you do understand that,
I failed twice now.
You do understand. Okay,
I'll keep
so
pitching.
Got it. So how much equity is ours in this deal?
So ours is the $65 million. And when I say equity, we're guaranteeing a loan that they're going to borrow, right, and pay back, and it's $65 million.
How much do we own of that then? Percentage?
Of their project?
Yeah.
We don't own any of it, right? What we own is, again, their loan, their property. The only time we ever own it is if they don't pay and we foreclose and take it.
Got it. The $65 million, it's coming from a loan from the city of Bayonne.
It'll be a loan we'll underwrite it, we'll go out to the investment community and borrow the money.
Nothing out of the taxpayers' pockets?
Correct.
Okay. So no homeowner or renter will feel the impact of this over the next 30 years in a negative way?
And the only reason you have me, the answer is yes. No homeowner will, and for all the reasons I described to you earlier, if bad things happen, how we resolve those so that it continues to be no, the expectation is that the answer is a hard no. If bad things happen, there's a whole list of ways we resolve those bad things so it remains to be no. But the point is, yes, the taxpayers will not be responsible.
Okay. The $65 million, is there like an itemized, is there a way to get an itemized list of exactly why that's the number?
So in our public hearing, you'll hear from our financial advisor, whose job it was to figure out what was the appropriate number. And it's not, in fact, be honest with you, it's the $65 million is what we're mostly been talking about, but the real negotiation was about the annual service charge itself. So while the $65 million is the eye-popping number that gives everyone some pause here, I agree. Most of the negotiation was about how much taxes are we going to get off this project after we pay the $65 million, and you'll hear from our financial advisor on that. So that was sort of the number that we were mostly focused on, the 2.6 million rising to 7.5. Should it be 2.8? You know, should it go to 9? How do you figure all that? That was sort of the prime part of it, but the need for the 65 million guarantee is also be addressed by them. But yes.
What contributions could the city of Bayonne expect to see other than revenue from this huge project?
So
what benefits other than money do we get from this huge project?
It depends on whether you consider 2,100 jobs a benefit to the city. So the estimated full-time jobs, that's permanent jobs. The construction jobs during construction, which are 100% union, so they're required to build the project with 100% union. That's going to benefit people in Bayonne. There's a local source section in the financial agreement. When everyone reads it, they'll see at the back end there's a whole 2 paragraphs about local sourcing, the prevailing wage, the cleaning up of the contaminated site, the rateable, the jobs.
So jobs, like would they be contributing?
So I mean, the jobs is
big. Look at jobs is big. I'm not knocking that, but
like how many jobs? And it's the variety of the jobs, right? So a warehouse job is a warehouse job, and they're almost all the same. This is like a cacophony of jobs of everything you could sort of imagine, of all sorts of expertises. So and many of them are really high paying jobs too. So they're not all hourly, they're professional. So the jobs is really one of the main drivers on top of the ratables, I would say. I mean, the governing body will tell you what motivates them, but I think the jobs has got to be one of the biggest, construction and permanent.
I think we could find some cool jobs and some construction permits with new schools too. But anyway, so
True.
What else, right? When you think of contributions, I think about what are you going to contribute to the entire community? Because you're going to be using our roadways, they're going to be using facilities, they're going to be shopping our business, I like to hope they'll order from our magnificent restaurants. But, I think the biggest thing I've seen from large developments is their lack of contribution to the community as a whole. And I would hope that somewhere in the contract that can be built in, saying like, listen, we'd love to contribute to a school. We'd love to open up a class and have students come over and learn about filmmaking. I mean, I can go on with the amount.
So they are committing themselves to an apprentice program.
Okay.
And to involve the Board of Education in opportunities to learn the crafts, whatever they may be. There's one agreement that's not here that will be at the public hearing, which is the redevelopment agreement. So the details are baked into that. For example, they're being required to do some stormwater improvements. The other big benefit is they're, at the end of the day, going to have 6 acres of public space. We haven't talked about it all tonight, but if you look on the entire perimeter, is going to be a walking path and a path with, it's big enough to hold emergency vehicles, bicycles, walkers. It's going to be lit. It's going to be safe. It's going to go the entire perimeter. And then ultimately, maybe someday connect to Collins Park if we can get the Port Authority to agree. Or otherwise, you have to go back up the street. It also has parking for that walkway. So there's a huge open space component. There's a passive park as well. So there's sort of those sort of improvements as well. So those are not insignificant, but they are also committed to work with the Board of Education.
And we'll see that in an agreement?
Yeah.
Okay. And is there any financial benefit to the Board of Education from this project at all?
Not directly, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the benefit is to the extent that this project creates ratables that require the city to raise less taxes or to allocate money to other priorities, it's that much money, that it's basically more money the taxpayers could afford to do for the Board of Education, right? Zero-sum game.
Would that be something the council would be looking into, since this could just significantly help the city of Bayonne to start contributing a little bit more?
They can't.
It's possible. I'll take that as a fair answer. And then I guess my last request is just, I really hope that we continue to poll the city on their feelings, thoughts, and concerns around this, because after all, we all play a part in this community, and we are one Bayonne. So just something to strongly consider. So thank you for your time.
Nice to meet you. Yes, ma'am.
Can you come up to the microphone, please?
How do they plan on doing the apprentice program when the offices and the editing buildings won't be there? How are they planning on
So,
doing that?
I mean, we're in the early stages. They've made a commitment. I think it's in the redevelopment agreement. I'll make sure. It's not in any of these agreements you're looking at tonight. To involve the Board of Education as in an educational way, a cooperative way, to bring them into what's happening over there. I don't think they probably even have spoken to the Board of Education at this point. But I think it's...
And just to reconfirm, it will still be $900 million even with the changes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Franco?
Good evening. Peter Franco, 109 West 53rd Street. I think every council meeting is important. Mr. Coffey said tonight this is a major project, $750 million project, a $65 million bond. This might be one of the largest projects that I've ever seen come across the council, since attending. So it's a pretty important meeting, and as I've spoken at previous meetings, I think it's very important that we should be looking into streaming. And getting this, ensuring that everybody has access to the city council meetings. One of the things Mr. Baumann mentioned, a community meeting, regarding this, and I was kind of confused myself. I usually try to stay up on things, and I was like, when was that meeting? And then somebody had mentioned, and I said, wow. I said, so that was the meeting after a 4-day weekend, where hardly anybody was notified like the day before, and you had people out there. But here's the kicker to all that. The actual project changed from that point to where it is now. And we're learning that there's so many different things in there, whether it's the energy grid, whether it's the underground parking, buildings that are no longer even there. There were significant changes to that. We talked about, I guess, being inclusive and trying to reach out in these meetings. So you had that one meeting, but then things changed. And so we're here tonight because, that's the law, right? Like you have to introduce the ordinance before you have final passage. So the only reason this is a special meeting for this evening is because we couldn't get it fast enough on the previous council. So this idea that like we're being very transparent about this is a little fraudulent.
Well, there were things that were going on up until even this week, so it couldn't get on the meeting before. Joe, if you want to expand.
Yeah, I mean, my only point is there has to be a first time, right? There has to be a time when we first, so this is it, right? Clearly, the community meeting was comprehensive. 90% of what is here was there. And the sort of the changes you're describing as significant in the overall project, they're not. In a project this size, those kinds of tweaks are pretty standard operating procedure. We may find mid-construction that they're making some changes. It's just you don't do $1 billion almost project without having things evolve at some level. So underground parking versus above ground parking, for example, I think that's how it trying to make it economic, right? So their job when we're trying to talk to them about making a contribution is to value engineer their project and make it less expensive. So many of these changes are in part driven by bringing the dollars and the value of the project into line with what they can afford to do.
No, totally understand. And I mean, if you have it underground, obviously it's more expensive to go underground, and there's a cost factor in that. But when you say little changes, like that could be a $100 million change, which is almost a tenth of, less than a tenth, almost 9% of what this whole project is. So, I mean, to me, it's pretty significant in all of that. But I wanted to ask you, because, Mr. Baumann, because you spoke from your experience, but you were also the attorney that handled selling of the public utility. Is that correct?
I did.
All right. You are aware that I think, this has been a topic that many people in Bayonne have been frustrated with, have voiced their opinions with. Folks that are sitting on the dais that are elected officials have also voiced their opinion against this. So what do you say to folks that remember you from the water deal? And how are they going to trust you at this point that...
Look, water deal, I first represented Bayonne under Mayor Collins. So we can talk about Carnival Cruise, we can talk about acquiring the Motby, we can talk about the golf course. The stuff that I've worked on for Bayonne until recently spanned 25 years. I still, and we could spend an entire night talking about what was going on the moment that concession agreement was etched. This is not the time or place for that. I'm happy to talk to you over there or some other day.
Well, I mean, since you mentioned the concessions...
But look, my point is, let me just finish. So
Okay.
I stand by my 35 years of reputation, and people can decide to trust me or not. I look myself in the mirror every night. I'm perfectly happy and satisfied that I've done everything fiduciary responsibility, which I take very seriously on behalf of every client, including Bayonne, including that transaction. And I stand behind it.
If I can just go back, I mean, because you're like you said, I mean, your experience is vast, right? You've worked on many projects, but this was one of the projects in that. You mentioned concessions. So in your mind, that was a great deal when you put it together. I think that's fair to say. You had Bayonne's best, foot forward in that, and you were looking out for Bayonne as your client. So now, within that deal, right, there was concession money that was allocated for water rate stabilization. And I don't want to go too far down this hole here, but just to sum it up, ultimately that was earmarked. Everybody thought that was going into there, and then that was actually allocated and put into the budget to to close budget gaps as one-time sources, right? Now, what's to say when you look back at that, right? Because I think you had your best heart, like
More than
trying
that,
to do it,
yes.
right? So this is a project that was very important. You wanted to see successful, and then we found that within a new council, there was ways to work around what the deal was, and then that money was absorbed. And then when it was time for the water rate stabilization, there was none of that, right? So in this deal, this will be my final question. In this deal, can you foresee, or at least try to, ensure that there's gaps that are closed? So not a new council can come in and say, oh, no, we're going to take that money, any money that's allocated, because I think that that's important, right?
So I have this question all the time in my career, right? I have governing bodies that say to me, we're going to do this transaction, we're going to do this deal, we're going to approve this. How can you make sure that a subsequent governing body doesn't change it? And I tell them the same thing that I'm going to tell you now. That's not how America works. People got elected, get to make decisions, and they can change things. That's the way it works. So there is nothing that any lawyer, financial advisor can do to limit, within reason, what future governing bodies can do. They get elected, and then with that election, they have the power to make decisions, which could be, and often are, very different than the last governing body. So there is no solution to what you're suggesting, and I would argue that's sort of what makes democracy what democracy is, right? The future governing body gets to make the decisions. So there are limitations at the end of the day. What any lawyer, what any governing body, despite, again, had this question many times in my career, how can you make sure the next governing body doesn't change? This is perfect. We think they can mess it up. Well, they can if they want to, because they're elected with that right. So I can't fix that problem, and nobody can. And
right,
by the way, it's
any-
why we are America. That sounds like a soapbox thing. I apologize for that, but it's really what defines our democracy.
But do you, Mr. Baumann, do you foresee any potential changes that a future government could make, or within this council itself?
Sure.
When it comes
So when you read into this, you'll see in there that there's a letter of credit, and you'll see in there that in 7 years, the governing body can have a discussion with the property owner about whether or not to continue the letter of credit or change it. That 7 years from now, governing body could make a change, right? So there are things they could do. Almost every agreement with another party can be amended, changed, rescinded. So there is absolutely powers inherent in future governing bodies that will always exist if the counterparty to a contract wants to change it. It just is.
Thank you.
said 7 years. The letter of credit can be relooked, rethought, and reconfigured. Can't we make it less? Let's make it less. Why 7 years?
Oh, wait.
Lucky number 7.
So if we decide to change it earlier,
Yeah.
they'll be fine with it.
I'm sorry?
The developer would be fine if we changed it. The letter of credit's to protect us, not them. So the 7 years was a negotiation. We thought 7 years, the project's built, it's running, it's payment, it's going well. Then they could come and ask us to reconsider it.
Why
But
can't we change it now? And
we don't want to
after-
change it. It's our protection. It's very important to us. We don't want to change it. The letter of credit is what's secure. It's our first line of
No,
defense.
I know that. I know that. But why later rather than sooner? Just in case.
No, because well, first place, two parties can always agree to anything, right? So we could agree to something in the future. But we wanted to show in the agreement that until you're up, running, and succeeding, we're not even going to talk to you about this issue. So it was important to us to be later, not sooner. It was important for them to be sooner, not later. 7 years is where we landed.
Okay, but you said 30 months it will take for them to build it, correct?
So we want them to finance it, build it, lease it up, have it running for
What
a
do
couple
you mean
years.
lease it up? They don't have a tenant yet.
So so you've probably read about Netflix, right? So Netflix down in Monmouth County is being built. It's a sole sourced. They know who they.
Newark.
Well, but those are the studio itself is going to be the main. This one is not that. This one is their expectation is that there'll be a lot of different users of this project, not a single user. So we want them to be built up and running for a long time before we consider anything about the letter of credit.
And Joe, also, if there's any changes made, you run the risk of both parties for litigation and lawsuits.
Yeah, it can only happen if we agree.
Right.
Can happen.
Madeline, you have a list, or you? All right, Pat, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Pat Desmond, 131 West 4th Street. You said that it's going to be 100% union?
Yes, sir.
What's down there now? Are they union? That's working there?
You mean the people that are putting? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think there's union people down there,
Okay,
but
yeah.
that's one thing.
But I mean I don't know. But they don't have a contract with us to do it.
I don't know if you remember, but when you did that water deal, I was up here. I was about the only person that was here questioning that deal.
Okay.
And I asked you
I remember
I
you.
was-
what was going on with the
I was
union.
questioning that water deal as well.
Yeah, you were here.
So
But
there
the-
you go.
with the-
And he still trusts me.
And I asked you about the people that were working for the water department and what was going to happen to them. And they were all union. And you screwed every one of them.
They all went and worked there. We can.
No, they didn't all go and work anywhere. They got screwed. So you're guaranteeing you're not going to do that to these people now.
I'm not sure who those people are, but you're
Well,
talking.
the people that work for the water department that got screwed when you
I understand, but what did that?
you did your deal. And
Look,
you were hired to do it.
No.
I get it. I get it.
We're
But
way off
people
topic.
got screwed.
I don't-
Some of them had 23, 24 years, needed one more year to retire and got screwed. How are you going to guarantee us that you're not going to do that to these guys?
Who are these guys?
The new union people that you're putting down.
So I work for you, not them. Them being the developer.
I get it.
And B,
I get
the
it.
financial.
How are you guaranteeing that?
The financial agreement. If they don't do it, they violate the financial agreement, which is their pilot.
So it's up to them to guarantee that. Is that going to be in that agreement?
It's in the agreement. You'll see it when you read it. It's in section. Do you know off the top of your head? There you go.
All right, and it just so you know, that water deal was the worst deal that ever happened to this town.
I hear you.
And it's going to go on for another 30-something years. I hope that's not this deal.
Okay.
Madeline? State your name and address, please.
Sure. My name is Bob Beneke. I represent and am the owner's representative and financial advisor to Bayonne 1888 Studios. Thanks for having this meeting tonight. Thank you for the public. They always ask great questions. At the September meeting, I gave probably 20, 30 people my cell number. Anyone in the public I don't want to say it because it's on TV, but anyone in the public here tonight, any of the council members, please feel free to give me a call at any time. I just want to address two real quick things. Obviously, your team, Mr. Baumann, Mr. Coffey, your whole team, your financial advisors and your team have been great. They've really asked the hard questions, and they've transferred your questions and concerns really well and directly to us. In terms of the site plan application change, at the September meeting, I did mention that we were looking at different alternatives because of the underground parking and some of the cost escalation issues. The first total project cost, which is the investment in the project, was scored on October 5th of 2021, when the inflation rate took off over the winter 21-22. We experienced about a 9.5% increase in those costs. In addition, we have experienced over the last year about another 6 or 7%. So that's about a 16% cost increase. That caused our costs to go up by about $130 million. So we reconfigured the studio to be a studio complex first and have the structured garage. It's still 1.5 million square feet, and the studios are going to have offices. They're going to have all the sound stages. They're going to have all the workshops.
Was that shortened from the original plan?
It was short, not by the sound stages are essentially the same. There's a little bit different in terms of the configuration. The planning board approved the site plan about a week or two ago. That site plan was prepared about 3 or 4 weeks after the September forum, and it was delivered to the planning board maybe a month or so thereafter, and it was heard over about maybe, again, about a week or two ago. So the whole scope is the same. It's a film-oriented studio complex. It's not warehouses. It has much equipment, all your sound stages, all your workshops. As Mr. Baumann indicated, there's a whole list of employees, again, from general plumbers and carpenters to grip persons and soundstage people and setup persons. There is going to be at least 660 permanent permanent jobs that we're going to try to have as residents. In other words, we're going to do indigenous recruitment of Bayonne residents to work there. Then there's about another 1,500 jobs that will be production-based, and that will also include Bayonne-oriented residents. I actually, at the September meeting and around the city over the last 6 months, I will be at those job fairs myself. The construction company will. I've invited Mr. Hanley, your financial advisors and others, the council, your community members, come on out. When we have them, we want you there, because our best bet is to have good Bayonne citizens, good Bayonne residents occupy these jobs, because then it helps. We have just under 75 acres of total area. The buildable area is about 59 acres. We've increased the height by about 12 to 14 feet on average. That's a very costly proposition. The sidewalk that Mr. Baumann indicated will wrap around the entire peninsula. That's the city's requirement, and maybe DEP's requirement. That's great. It's 16 feet wide. To Joe's point, it's not just a little cartway or a little normal sidewalk in the downtown. This is 16 feet wide. My guess is that it's well over a half a mile from top to bottom along the fishhook, if you will, and includes an open public space of about 3 acres that hopefully will connect to Collins Park. In addition, we've placed 20 public parking spaces for the public use into the on-site parking inventory for the public to use this open space, and they're invited. The apprenticeship program is required in part of the planning board documents, and if not, we will have, and I give you my word, and we will be there with the apprenticeship program. It's not going to be where we have an isolated education room, but it will be in one of the several sound stages in the workshops, and we're committed to working on that. In terms of the financial issues, I'm going to let, obviously, your financial advisors talk about that. But let's just say right now we're paying, as Mr. Baumann indicated, 1.25, 1.3 million taxes. When this is done, this is going to pay in excess of $4 million like that minimum to the city. Okay? So your take will be that difference. On top of, as Mr. Baumann indicates, we'll pay for directly the redevelopment area bond. That redevelopment area bond could be as high as $3 or $4 million a year on top of it. The reason for the bond is the gap in the financing includes all of these various public emoluments or public good or community benefits, including the 6 acres. Remember, we're giving over 6 acres to the public as a community benefit. That acreage is a lot of money. It's 10% of our site. And we're also having the apprenticeship program. We're doing site remediation. We're going to do some off-site stormwater improvements as well, all to the good. We're not able to swap the money out. As Joe articulated, we are not making a choice between a school and a road and a water system and a redevelopment project. The redevelopment project requires this for those specific purposes. About 5 years after that 4 million plus, you'll be seeing over 7 million plus, because as Mr. Baumann indicated at the outset, one of those thresholds is a percentage of revenue. The percentage of revenue goes from 10% to 18% after 5 years. So you've got another cushion there of $7 million. We will then be the largest taxpayer in the city, the largest private employer, and you'll have a 6-acre park with public access, with an apprenticeship program, and all of those jobs will be oriented towards Bayonne residents. This project will cost probably in the neighborhood of $925 million. We want to get started somewhere in the early summer and complete this sometime towards the latter part of 2025. Again, thank everybody for their questions. I'll be glad to answer anything also. We're not here to throw out numbers. That's your guys' responsibility. We understand that. That would be self-serving on my part. One last point. There is something called the Type 1 school district in New Jersey. Only Summit has that. There's actually about 30 of them. But the only real district anymore remaining is Summit, and that you don't require a referendum for either. That the governing body doesn't even need to have a 2/3 vote. But that's going down a rabbit hole. Thank you very much. Good night.
Mr. Beneke, I remember having several 2-hour conversations with you over the water deal.
No,
And,
I was not on the water deal.
Huh?
I was never on the water deal.
There was a bunch of formulas, and I called you, and I spoke to you. I
Oh,
know
about
that.
the formulas maybe, but not about a water
The
deal.
formulas for their revenue stream,
Okay,
which has been a sore spot for the city of Bayonne for a long time.
okay, but I never did any modeling of the revenue stream or any of that. Not here.
You definitely were the one I spoke to. I'm
Okay,
positive of
that's fine. I wrote the book on public finance in New Jersey. That's
I know you
fine,
did.
but I don't want to be part of the water deal.
That was
But-
NW, I think. NW Financial.
That's NW.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Gail?
I just have a comment for the gentleman. Thank you for all that information. However, you're not giving us the open space. It's required by law. So, I'm sorry?
The park is not required by law, and we're dedicating it to the city.
Okay, but the other walkway and everything is required by law.
Right, but
Yeah.
the park we're dedicating to the city.
Yeah, so, yes, the walkway is required by DEP.
Yes,
The
thank
park
you.
is dedicated.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, no,
16 feet.
right, right.
Madeline Neal will return in hopefully a minute.
Start without him.
Yeah.
He'll catch up. Okay. 01 is an ordinance of the City of Bayonne, County of Hudson, State of New Jersey, approving a financial agreement by and between the City of Bayonne and Togus Urban Renewal LLC for the property identified as Block 332, Lot 3, Block 360, Lot 2, Block 390, Lots 1 and 2, also known as RJ 67, and Block 391, Lots 1 and 2, and a resolution fixing Wednesday, February 15, 2023, at 7 p.m. in the Dorothy E. Harrington Council Chambers as a time and place for a public hearing and final passage. Who would like to move to the resolution?
Move it.
And on the resolution, Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Carroll is absent. Mr. Perez.
He's coming, he's here now. We're voting on 01.
Yes, and it's on the
And it's up to
resolution
you.
fixing Wednesday, February 15th.
Sorry.
I vote aye on 01.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer. Aye. Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
O2 is an ordinance of the City of Bayonne, County of Hudson, State of New Jersey, providing for the special assessment of the cost of certain improvements on the property identified as Block 332, Lot 3, Block 360, Lot 1, Block 390, Lots 1 and 2, and Block 391, Lot 1 and 2, and a resolution fixing Wednesday, February 15th, at 7 p.m. in the Dorothy E. Harrington Council Chambers. There's a time and place for public hearing and final passage.
So moved.
And a second. And on the resolution, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer. Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
03 is an ordinance of the City of Bayonne, County of Hudson, State of New Jersey, authorizing the guarantee of not to exceed $65 million aggregate principal amount of the city guaranteed redevelopment area bonds, and a resolution fixing Wednesday, February 15th at 7 p.m. in the Dorothy E. Harrington Council Chambers as a time and place for a public hearing and final passage.
Move it.
Second.
And on that resolution, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer. Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
R2 is authorizing the appropriations reserve transfer number 2 in the calendar year 2022 budget, and is read in full. This is whereas the comptroller is hereby authorized to make the following calendar year 2022 budgetary appropriations transfers in accordance with NJSA 48:4-59. And now therefore be it resolved by the Municipal Council of the City of Bayonne, with at least 2/3 of the full membership of the Municipal Council concurring, that from account primary and general elections, other expenses, $48,185, to rent control, other expenses, $11,600, building and grounds, other expenses, $5,000, vehicle maintenance, other expenses, $30,000, and from to defined contributions retirement act account $1,585. I'd like to move it.
Move it.
Second.
And on that resolution, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer. Mr. La Palusa.
Aye.
And with nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And on the motion to adjourn, Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Carroll. Aye. Mr. Perez.
Aye.
Ms. Weimer. Aye. Mr. La Palusa.
Aye. Have a good evening.